Good evening, folks. My name is Kalpin Modi. I'm one of the associate directors here at the White House Office of Public Engagement. You have just watched President Obama's second State of the Union address live from the Capitol here in Washington, D.C. And we are coming to you live from the White House. We've got a great panel of senior administration officials. We're going to take your questions for, I'd say, the next 45 minutes or so. A bunch of you already submitted questions during the President's address. Others will join now. So if you're joining now, you can go onto Facebook. You can upload your question to the White House wall. If you're joining us on Twitter, you can tweet us at White House with the hashtag SOTU, and my esteemed colleague Sarah Bernard here is going to be sorting through those questions and posing them to our panelists. You may also have noticed this great crowd behind me. How you doing, guys? So we'll also have a chance to ask these folks some questions in the process. Why don't we get started? Brian Deese, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Brian Deese. I work at the National Economic Council here at the White House. I'm part of the economic team that works on the President's policies focused on job creation, economic growth, and trying to make our economy more competitive going forward.
Good evening. I'm Roberto Rodriguez. I'm the President's Special Assistant for Education, and I serve on the Domestic Policy Council here at the White House, and particularly manage his Cradle Through Career education agenda.
Hi, my name is Ben Rhodes. I'm the Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategic Communications. Within the NSC, the National Security Council, I have responsibility for our communications, our speechwriting, and our public diplomacy abroad. And just want to thank everybody for joining and all of you here in the room.
And last but not least, I'm Sarah Bernard, Director of Online Engagement at White House New Media Group.
And the seat in the middle is not our imaginary friend. It's our colleague David Seamus, who's going to be joining us shortly. So I guess maybe the first question, which just came in online, would probably be for you, Roberto. It's from Grant Weaver in Rockport, Massachusetts. And Grant asks, I am a high school senior who plans to go off to college in the fall. Like most other prospective students, I'm wondering how to pay the high costs of tuition, room, board, and supplies. While there's financial aid available, it is never enough, and it's hard to come by. These costs are leaving millions of young Americans in debt as they try to enter the, quote, real world. Is there anything the Obama administration is doing to make further education available?
Well, Grant, thank you for your question. It's a topic that I think is on the minds of millions of young people across the country who really have aspirations to continue on to college. You heard the President talk about the importance of this tonight in his remarks on education. We're really trying to regain America's standing internationally with a goal by the end of this decade to regain our international standing with the highest number of college completers in the world. We've done three things really to address college affordability. It's been central to our agenda over the past 2 years. The first is really to reform and reorganize our student aid system. This is something that the President referred to. We've shifted over $60 billion that previously went in subsidies to banks into grant aid and student aid to students. That's enabled us to really do more to expand the Pell Grant, which is a real lifeline of funding for low-income students to be able to attend college. The second thing we've done is to really look at making sure that our student loan repayment options are more affordable. And moving forward for borrowers after 2014, we'll be able to peg that payment to a share of their monthly income that's about 10% of their monthly income so that they're able to better afford and manage their loan repayment. The third thing is something that the President called on Congress tonight to work on, which is to make permanent his American Opportunity Tax Credit. This is a credit that's worth $10,000 over 4 years for college tuition, as well as the costs of textbooks, the costs of attending college. We've been able to grow that tuition tax credit by over $700 since our administration took office. We're looking to make that permanent to really help more Americans afford college.
Thanks, Roberto. Sarah, what do you have from online?
I've got one from Ethel Nyman in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I think this one's going to be for you, Brian. She'd like to know, shall becoming more competitive in the global market chiefly require American workers to work for less than workers in foreign and developing nations?
Well, it's a great question, and as you all heard tonight, the President talked a lot about how we can position our country to win our economic future and outcompete in areas like education as well as innovation and rebuilding this country. I think it's important to step back and think about what a healthy and positive competition can do for our country. The wrong type of competition is a competition which leads to a race to the bottom, where but the only way that companies or countries compete against each other is by lowering wages, lowering standards, and driving down standards of living. A healthy, positive competition is one where America is investing in the areas where it has core strength, and you heard the President talk about some of those tonight. In research, particularly in the clean energy sector. In our education system, we have the strongest, most vibrant university system in the world that is a magnet for students and researchers all over the world. If we invest in these areas, if we stay ahead in these areas, then a competition, the positive competition, can actually rise the tide and lift all boats. And so that's the type of competition that we're hoping for. It's going to require a lot of serious work, and it's going to require making very difficult trade-offs to make these investments in areas that will promote growth while cutting back and reforming areas where we can afford to do so. So the President has a vision of a very positive competition that will lead to more jobs and higher wages here in the United States. But as you heard from the President tonight, we have a lot of work ahead of us to make that vision a reality, and that was what the President was outlining tonight.
I'd just add one thing to what Brian said that touches on our foreign policy agenda. One of the things that's taken place in the last few years is that a lot of countries that have grown their economies, in some cases with lower wage employees, actually have growing middle classes. So when we traveled to India, for instance, the President put a huge focus on the potential for U.S. exports in a place like India, which has an emerging middle class. And that can make India a market for our goods. And so we can actually grow our economy by selling more to countries like India and China that have a broader base of prosperity, a broader middle class in their own countries. So our export initiative, which is to double our exports over the next 5 years, is rooted in large part in our efforts both through our own economy, but also through our relations with other countries, our trade agenda, our agenda through the G20, to try to up our exports to these countries where we have seen wage increases and increases in the middle class base so that they can become purchasers of our goods. And we can, again, grow our own economy and support millions, really, of U.S. jobs by upping our exports to the developing world that has now kind of come out of poverty in some instances and created a broader base of prosperity where they are.
Sarah, you want to take one from Twitter, and then we'll shift to the audience here?
Yeah, I've actually got one. I got another one for you, Ben. From Lori Lathrop in Naperville, Illinois. What kind of diplomacy do you plan on taking with Iran? What are your long-term goals regarding the situation in North Korea? Will you send troops to South Korea? It's a three-parter.
Well,
brief.
yeah, we'll take them in order. First of all, with Iran, it's obviously been a huge focus of the President. One of the things that we've done with Iran, though, is we put it not in a context of some kind of bilateral conflict between the United States and Iran, but in the context of global nonproliferation, of stopping the spread of nuclear weapons. Iran, like every nation, has obligations under the Non-Proliferation Treaty to not pursue a nuclear weapons capability. And so when the President strengthens the global nonproliferation regime through our efforts to reach a START treaty with Russia, through our efforts to have a nuclear security summit that rallies the world behind the goal of securing nuclear materials, and through our efforts to strengthen that nuclear nonproliferation treaty, it increases the base of nations that we're cooperating with to pressure Iran and to say to Iran, which we've done from the beginning of this administration, you have a clear choice. If you choose to abide by your obligations under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, you can have a future in which you have the benefits of peaceful nuclear energy. You can have a more normal relationship with the United States and the international community that will have economic benefits for your people. If you continue, on the other hand, to pursue a nuclear weapons capability, or at least fail to build the confidence of the international community that you're living up to your obligations, you'll face increased pressure, primarily through economic sanctions to date. And so what we've done is we've presented that choice to Iran. Thus far, they've failed to take the opportunity to adjust their own behavior and to build the confidence of the international community that their nuclear program is for peaceful purposes. So because of that, we've increased the sanctions on Iran internationally through our own efforts. The Europeans have done the same, so have many of our Asian allies and partners, so have the Russians. But our approach going forward is going to continue to be to present that choice to Iran so that it's clear to them that if they want to take a different course and if they can build confidence in the international community that they are pursuing a peaceful nuclear capability, that they have the possibility of better relations with the United States. So that's been kind of our dual track, leaving the door open to engagement and better relations with Iran if they fulfill their non-proliferation obligations, but upping the pressure on Iran if they refuse to do so. North Korea is a similar situation in that they too have been violating several UN Security Council resolutions, failing to live up to their non-proliferation obligations, their own commitment that they made to abandon nuclear weapons several years ago. So what we've done is offer the same choice to the North Koreans. They too have come under stronger sanctions since the Obama administration has been in office, but we want to continue to keep open the door to them to move in a different direction. With respect to the question, we actually already have troops who've been stationed in South Korea since the end of the Korean War, and nearly 30,000 U.S. troops are in South Korea. South Korea is one of our strongest allies in the world, frankly, and so what we've done as a basis of our security posture in Northeast Asia is to say we'll continue to have an unshakable support for South Korea's security, but that again we want to resolve these issues with North Korea in a peaceful way through our engagement. But again, the North Koreans will have to keep their commitments, their non-proliferation commitments, if they want to have a better future and a better relationship with South Korea, with the United States, and with the world. And this was, a key topic of discussion when the Chinese were here recently. They obviously have a very close relationship with North Korea. They too have been concerned by North Korea's recent actions, the shelling that took place of a South Korean island in December, for instance. So the Chinese sent a clear signal along with the United States, which is important, that we have a shared and aligned position on this, to North Korea, that we expect them to live up to their commitments and to act in a responsible manner so that we can pursue an engagement that could hopefully lead to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Thanks, Ben. Who's got a question in here? I was standing over here, so I shouldn't be biased.
Oh, they're not all canned?
What's that? Okay, just tell me your name, where you're from, and your question.
Hello, my name is Nicole. I'm from Portland, Oregon, and I'm a TRIO alum, so this is actually a question for you regarding education. So just curious, from the President's, what he spoke about today regarding innovation, how do you see TRIO matching innovative programs in the future? Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Nicole, for the question. And for those in the audience that aren't familiar with TRIO, it's a terrific program to really provide a pathway toward and preparation toward higher education, beginning in the high school years for a number of students and continuing through their college years. TRIO's has really decades of making a difference for young people in terms of helping them get to school, get into higher education. It's also, I believe, really it's become more of an innovative program. In recent past, we've seen TRIO receive one of our Department of Education's Investing in Innovation Fund grants and scored among the highest of all applicants in terms of its application to expand in new directions. We're looking at really building on TRIO's success through that project in math and science. That's a theme that you heard the President talk about tonight, really doing more to strengthen the quality of instruction in science and mathematics and technology, better engage our students early in those subjects and prepare them for college and prepare them for careers. So we know programs like Upward Bound Math and Science, some of the Talent Search math and science programs have a real innovative track record there. Our department's seeking on building on that through these I3 grants. And TRIO will continue to be an important part of our higher education agenda. We are really focused on doing more to help support access to higher education. We know that getting to the President's first in the world goal requires us to move from about 42% of the proportion or share of our young people today that have a college degree to upwards of 60%. And doing that really requires us to draw on all kinds of new and innovative models, as well as models that have a track record of success like TRIO.
Thanks, Roberto. Sarah?
I just want to remind folks we're taking questions live right now, so you've got a chance to get your question in on Facebook. Just go to facebook.com/White House, and on Twitter @White House, use the hashtag SOTU. So we've got one from Twitter right now from Geek Pondering, who's nervous about the budget. So question is to @White House. I'll send it to the table and see who wants it. How are you going to pay for all the needed infrastructure projects without raising taxes or cutting into important programs?
Well, I'm happy to take that, and I think it's a very important question, and it's an important moment for us to take it head on. One of the things the President talked about tonight was restoring responsibility in government, and part of that is restoring a sense of responsibility to our federal budget and getting our federal finances in order. We inherited a substantial legacy of debt and deficit spending, and we also inherited an economy that was on the brink of collapse. And so we had to take a set of steps to do short-term additional deficit spending to help bring the economy out of a deep recession. We're starting to see some progress in that direction, but the result is that we do have a historically large deficit now, and projected in the future, perhaps even more worrying, out in the subsequent decades, we do face a large imbalance between what the government takes in and what the government is spending. So the President has, from the day he came into office, tried to change the tone of the debate around our fiscal policy measures, taking steps like restoring the sort of common sense rule that if you're going to spend for a new program or provide a new tax cut, you have to offset it by cutting a program or increasing a tax. And he has also taken important steps like the passage of healthcare reform, which was the single largest contribution to lowering our long-term deficit projections that we've passed in this country in over a decade, and is projected to reduce the deficit by over $200 billion in the next decade and over $1 trillion in the subsequent decade. But all those steps leave us in a place where over the medium and long term we're still facing an unsustainable situation. And so what the President said tonight was that he is willing to support a 5-year freeze in all discretionary spending that is not related to security. So the portion of our budget, which is the domestic discretionary budget, we will freeze in our budget for 5 years. Now, that's a very tough and painful thing to do. What it means when you freeze at a nominal level, it means when the real cost of everything else goes up, that means that each year you're going to have to cut and be able to buy less with that same amount of resources. But the President made that commitment because he understands the importance of getting our fiscal house in order. But what I would point out, and this is going to be an important distinction, an important part of our debate over the next couple of months, is that what the President said is we cannot do that at the expense of making the core investments in the things that are going to drive our economy forward, in the education programs that Roberto is talking about, in the targeted ways to help our companies export more, like Ben was talking about. These measures that actually create jobs, make us more competitive, and help position us for the future. So we have to figure out a way to keep the trajectory of spending in line while investing in those programs. And what that means is it means cutting in other areas. And so the budget that the President will outline in the next couple of weeks is going to show a lot of painful choices, a lot of painful trade-offs. And it will say, in order to fund an increase in clean energy research that could hold the capacity to have a breakthrough in technology that could reduce our energy costs and help create jobs here in this country, we're going to have to cut in other areas. And he's going to present that budget, and I think we're going to have a real debate in Washington and across the country about what we can afford and what we need to cut. But the question is an important one because it goes to our values. And I think what you heard tonight from the President was he is ready and willing to cut where we can't afford to do so, and he's ready and willing to impose tough new measures like a 5-year freeze. but he knows what he thinks is necessary for this economy to grow going forward, and that's the core investments in innovation, in education, and in infrastructure and rebuilding our country. And that's what our budget is going to show.
I'd just add one thing, Brian. The cost of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have obviously been an extraordinary strain on our budgets. Above all, it's been an extraordinary strain on our men and women in uniform and their families. So that's always at the front of our minds. But with regard to the budget number, at the height of the Iraq War, we were spending upwards of over $100 billion a year, for instance. That number has obviously come significantly down with the significant drawdown in troops that we've had. Even with the increase in Afghanistan, the troop levels in Afghanistan are still 60,000 less than was at the peak in Iraq, for instance. So this year is already the lowest budget number for the two wars combined that we've had in several years. And the trajectory of that number continues to be downward. So as we, again, bring all of our troops out of Iraq and as we begin to draw down the numbers of troops in Afghanistan, again, the principal saving will be the sacrifices that our men and women in uniform will become less. But it also has an effect on our budget because we won't be spending nearly as much money fighting these wars as we have the last several years.
Thanks, Ben. This is a question that came in during the President's address. It's via Twitter from Tony House in D.C., who wants to know which cabinet member is sitting out tonight.
It is Ken Salazar.
Do we know where he is?
Somebody does.
I like that question.
Yeah,
Tony House is not cleared for that information.
copy that. We'll let him know. He's probably watching right now. Who's got a question here? Yeah.
I'm Barbara Weinstein with the Reform Jewish Movement. The president spoke a lot, understandably, about long-term plans in education and technology. Can you speak to some of the shorter-term plans for helping individuals who have been hardest hit by the downturn in the economy, for example, addressing the cuts to food stamps and other programs that provide assistance? Thank you.
Thanks.
Sure. One of the things that the president did touch on tonight, but I think is worth revisiting in the context of your question, is the agreement that the president signed right at the end of last year that was negotiated and was a bipartisan agreement at the end of the lame duck Congress. That agreement, we were facing at the end of the year not only the potential expiration of a set of tax cuts that would have meant that a typical middle-class family would have seen their taxes increase by about $3,000, but we were also facing the prospect of unemployment insurance running out. And in the month of December, there were 2 million Americans who were facing the prospect of having their unemployment cut off. And over the course of 2011, we were looking at as many as 7 million Americans who would have lost those benefits. And so what the president did at the end of at the end of the year was fight for an agreement, both the president and the vice president, that would restore those benefits and extend those benefits through the full year in 2011, so that for this entire year, those who are out of work and who are looking for work will have the security of knowing that their unemployment benefits will be there. That's a really important thing for basic economic security and basic family security for millions of families. It's also a smart thing to do for our economy, because when economists look at what are the types of things that you can do to help create jobs and promote growth in the short term, what you find is that if you provide resources, if you cut taxes, if you provide resources to those who are lower income, that they are more likely to go out and spend those dollars. And then when those dollars get spent in the economy, that helps boost the economy, helps growth overall, and helps create jobs. So when independent economists look at a variety of different things to do, unemployment insurance always goes up near the top of the list for that reason. So that was a really important step, and what you saw were, as a result of passing that legislation, you saw a bunch of independent forecasters actually revise upward their projections for economic growth and job growth this year. Now, that was a very important step. We were heartened that we were able to get it done at the end of last year so that it wasn't hanging over hanging over our heads this year. But we are still in a very difficult economic environment. I don't need to tell you guys out here or anybody watching tonight that with an unemployment rate above 9% and with millions of Americans out of work, we can't be satisfied, and we have to wake up every morning and think about creative ways that we can help create jobs and help businesses out there make the investments that they need to get the economy going. We have a lot of work to do, and there are a lot of opportunities to protect vital programs like the ones you mentioned. We're going to have a debate about those programs going forward, and within an overall a freeze that the President outlined, he's going to identify what his priorities are where we could actually increase funding or protect key funding so that we don't pull back at this moment in the economy. And over the next couple months, we're going to have a debate about those priorities. But I think that what you'll see from this administration is a continued effort, like we did in December when we had an opportunity to extend unemployment benefits, to look for every creative opportunity we can to help give business incentives, to invest and create jobs now, help those people who are out of work get the training they need and get the resources they need to find a new job, because at the end of the day, that's our central priority. And if we don't get the pace of job growth going at a faster rate, then we haven't met the central economic priority that we're all here to focus on.
Sarah, what do you have online?
Yeah, before I put Roberto on the spot, I want to remind everybody, we're going to answer as many questions as we can tonight, but time is limited. So this is just the start of opportunities that we've put together all week. So if you've got a question for the President, go ahead and go to youtube.com, Ask Obama, and pose your question there for a live YouTube interview on Thursday. You can post questions for the Vice President on Yahoo. And if you're interested in specific issues, we'll do a deep dive on Thursday. So just take a look at whitehouse.gov SOTU.
Great.
That was my little plug.
No, that's good.
Did you like it?
I did like it. I was gonna plug whitehouse.gov/SOTU.
Thank you.
We're also doing a youth call tomorrow evening with David Plouffe and Stephanie Cutter, and you can sign up for that at whitehouse.gov/youthcall. Pretty simple.
Roberto, you ready?
I am.
Mr. Rom on Twitter wants to know, being #1 in education within a decade is rather optimistic. What proposals could make it possible?
Well, that's a good question. I think we really have to begin with the economic imperative that drives a lot of the education reform efforts that the President talked about tonight and that we're pursuing here across our administration. That economic imperative is such that nearly half of our new jobs moving forward are really going to require some type of post-secondary education, and that really requires us to begin with one central goal of making sure that all of our students are graduating college and career ready. That is the single most important thing that we can do as an education reform in our country moving forward. It's critical because we know that we're losing far too many of our young people before they even get to the 12th grade to 12th grade graduation. We're losing nearly a quarter of those young people. We know that we have too many of our young people that are graduating without the skills that they need to be able to succeed in college or to succeed in a meaningful career, and that's a key challenge. We are losing over $3.2 billion a year in costs for remediation because many of our young people don't leave school prepared. And we have in our community colleges and our associate's degree institutions, we have over half of our young people coming in needing additional work in reading and math and other key subjects. That's costing us dollars, that ends up costing young people time, energy, and money. And so what we've really proposed here with a redesign of the No Child Left Behind Act that the President talked about tonight is to focus on a new goal of college and career readiness for all young people. We also know that the other important thing we can do is to really redefine and right-size our federal role in education so that it supports innovation. and so that it supports improvement across our system. Right now, we have a series of very narrow defined programs across our federal system at the Department of Education. Those don't always really enable the type of innovation that we need at the school level, at the district level, to be able to really tackle achievement gaps, grow local solutions to improve student learning, really better engage students in key subjects so that they're able to succeed. So we have to do better there. And we need a better federal role in education that will actually reward success and recognize success rather than focusing on more punitive elements of failure. Right now, under the No Child Left Behind Act, we have over 30,000 schools that have been identified and labeled as failures. That's not an amount of schools that we're able to really facilitate interventions in from Washington. So we need a better law that really is going to do more to recognize and reward success and improvement and foster innovation. We think that with those types of reforms and with a focus on a great teacher in every classroom, that really can help unlock and unleash learning for students that will be able to succeed and meet the challenges that really our new global economy presents.
I've got a quick question from a teacher then, let me ask. This is from, oh, I'm going to mess it up, Slannon, I believe, on Twitter. Apologies. President Obama emphasized the importance of teachers. How can we make a more attractive profession to young people?
Sure. Well, you know, we know from the research that a great teacher can really make all the difference in terms of a student's learning and a student's success. We can see teachers really unlock the potential of students to really catch up, to be able to master high standards, and more importantly, to be able to prepare with the types of skills they'll need to be able to succeed after graduation, right? So that we're ensuring that our students are strong collaborators, that they're strong problem solvers, they're strong communicators, and that they really are able to exercise creativity and innovation in their learning. So we need to do more to attract more of our most talented young people into the teaching profession. It's an important profession to our nation's future. It's one that too often is undervalued, and that's why the president talked about the importance of teachers and the importance of the teaching career tonight. And so we're going to be doing more. We have a new national effort that folks can visit at teach.gov to learn more about teaching careers in their local areas. We've launched a new national goal of 100,000 science, mathematics, engineering, and technology teachers, and our efforts to prepare 100,000 new teachers by the end of the next decade. We'll be making new investments in model teacher training and teacher preparation programs, as well as new investments in research to really identify and hone in on what works best to really help support our STEM teachers.
Great. This is another international question, Ben, that I'll throw to you. It's from John Dixon in Brewster, Massachusetts. He submitted this using the web form during the president's address. He asks, how will the Obama administration stay engaged following the Southern Sudan referendum to make sure that the Bashir regime will negotiate the separation in good faith and to use this moment to create a permanent solution for the Darfur conflict?
It's a great question, and the president was able to spend some time in his speech today highlighting what just recently took place in Southern Sudan, which was a pretty extraordinary event. This is something that we've been focused on for a period of months. The president called us in his national security team in the summer because he was really concerned that the situation in South Sudan had drifted, that preparations were not proceeding on pace to hold the referendum for Southern Sudanese independence, which was part of the peace agreement that was reached in Sudan in 2005. And we knew that if this referendum did not go off on time, or if the North interfered with it, or if there were moves made to, for instance, arm proxy groups that have led to conflict in the past, that not only would you not have a peaceful referendum, but you could have another war in Sudan. And the last war between the North and South, of course, took about 2 million lives. So the president hosted an event at the UN the UN General Assembly in September to bring together the international community behind a sense of urgency to support the Sudanese referendum, Southern Sudanese referendum. We upped our efforts to get literally the materials that were necessary to hold the referendum to South Sudan. It takes a lot to move just the kind of election materials, ballot, literally the ballots that need to be counted, the personnel that needs to get on the ground, the UN support that goes into holding that kind of referendum, together with a lot of intensive diplomacy with the North and the South to assure that they're on pace to have a peaceful referendum. What happened, and this, by the way, included intervention from the president to the leadership of the North and the South as well, to urge them again to abide by their commitments to hold a peaceful referendum. What happened was truly inspiring, and the president made reference to it tonight. In recent weeks, the South Sudanese were able to vote. The referendum had some small incidences of violence, but went off relatively peacefully. The stories out of South Sudan were just hugely inspiring. People lining up in the middle of the night, all night to vote, people traveling for miles and miles in a country that only has about 40 miles of paved roads to reach ballot boxes to vote. Again, a country literally determining, or a region of a country literally determining its own destiny and voting for its own independence. So the first step in this process was to ensure that a peaceful referendum went off. We were very heartened, for instance, also to see statements from the North, the Sudanese government, saying that they would recognize a South Sudan if it chose to become independent. So we feel good about the fact that the referendum went off peacefully. That said, as the question suggests, this is only one part of a broader picture that is going to be necessary in order for there to be true peace in Sudan. A part of it, of course, is counting those ballots and working through the process that could lead to an independent South Sudan later this year. And we're going to continue to be engaged in that effort. But there's several key messages that the President on down through the administration has sent to both North and South Sudan on this. Number one is, again, we are being very strong in our messages to them that they should not return to the use of armed proxies to settle disputes. What's kind of sparked conflict in the past is the North has some militias that they could be associated with. The South is the same. These lead to skirmishes, which lead to a broader conflict. So we've been insistent that the parties deal with their differences through talks and not through violence and not through proxies. Thus far, again, there's been reasonably good progress in that effort, but it's going to be a continued point that we have to stress. A second point is that there are a lot of Southerners in the North, and there are a lot of Northerners in the South, and there's a potential for violence there as well, as you have movements of people, Southern Sudanese who live in the North who want to get to South Sudan, and again, Northerners in the South who want to get to the North, if there's a sense that there could be an independent country in South Sudan. These are people who who may have great humanitarian needs, so we've been working with the UN and other NGOs who are on the ground to ensure that there's both safe passage for these people and that they have support as they embark on what could be a very challenging journey. There's still an unresolved issue between the North and the South, a particular region of Abyei that has to have its own referendum to determine which part of Sudan it is a part of. So that is a final, very important flashpoint in terms of the North-South issue that needs to be resolved. And that, too, is the kind of issue that we would like to see resolved between the parties in talks and not through conflict. And we believe this could be the most important remaining issue between North and South Sudan and a lasting peace between North and South Sudan. And again, thus far, we feel good that with our diplomatic effort, our diplomatic engagement, with the international community's engagement, we're on track in that regard. And then, of course, the last piece is Darfur. Darfur is, of course, in the north. What we've been concerned about and what we've seen happen in the past sometimes is that repression or violence against civilians in Darfur sometimes lifts up when there's a sense that there's, again, movement towards independence elsewhere. So as the South Sudanese, for instance, may be moving towards independence, that could be a time of increased danger for civilians in Darfur if the government in the north chooses, again, to send a message. So what we've been doing is working very carefully with the North and with all those countries with influence over the North and with the international community to send a strong message that our commitment to peace and justice in Darfur is in no way taking a back seat to our support to South Sudan, that these are things that we're doing at the same time. There are agreements and there are obligations around what the North is committed to do in Darfur to ensure that there's peace and accountability in that region as well. So this will continue to be a front burner issue for us in the context of Sudan more broadly. So I guess the short version of that is we're very pleased and frankly inspired by what's taken place recently in southern Sudan. We believe that we see a course towards, again, a lasting peace between the North and the South. We remain focused on Darfur as well as a piece of the broader picture for peace in Sudan. We've sent a very clear message to the government of Sudan that it can have a better relationship with the United States, that some of the sanctions on it can be loosened if it continues to live up to its obligation with regard to the South and with regard to Darfur. But the last thing I'd say about this, and this forum is a good place to say it, this is an issue that simply would not have the attention that it has without young people, without coalitions like Save Darfur, without NGOs, without religious groups, who've all raised the attention of this issue in the United States and around the world. When you see the kind of support for a country like, or a potential country like South Sudan, which is hugely impoverished, you know, again, 40 some odd miles of paved roads, but the level of support for their aspirations, the aspirations of the southern Sudanese people, coming from the bottom up in the United States and countries around the world, that's what brought this to the fore. That's what brought it to the fore to then Senator Obama when he was in the Senate. That's what brought it to the fore in forums like the United Nations, where you see heads of state and foreign ministers from many countries meeting last September to discuss the future of South Sudan. So we see it as a kind of bottom-up activism that can help advance a more responsible foreign policy for the United States, but most importantly, support the aspirations of people in distant places like South Sudan, where hopefully we're seeing the birth of a new future and a more hopeful future for those people. So we're pleased that the President could honor this moment tonight, even as we know there's a huge amount of work to be done to address the issues that I just discussed of Abyei and Darfur and some of the internally displaced and refugees in the region.
Thanks, Ben. Let's take another question from the audience. Who's got one? It's right in here. Just introduce yourself again so we know where you're from.
Sean Guerin with Environment America. I'm here from DC. I was wondering that first, just wanted to thank the President for his support of renewable energy like wind and solar, and speaking about that in the State of the Union. I wanted to hear, 43% of our electricity comes from natural gas and nuclear right now, thanks mostly to massive subsidies and lax environmental review. What's your plan and what's the President's plan to move forward with more renewable energy like wind and solar, increasing that percentage of real clean energy in our country?
Thank you.
Sure. I'll mention a couple things. I think the first thing that you heard from the President tonight was to set a new national goal that we as a country can work toward, which is by 2035 to have 80% of our electricity produced from clean sources. Now, in some cases, that will mean wind and solar and renewable sources. In other cases, it will mean zero carbon or low carbon sources of energy like nuclear power and like natural gas that is produced in a way that does reduce or eliminate the carbon emissions. But I think the important part about setting this goal and about challenging the Congress and the country to reach it is that the President recognizes that in order to create the incentives, the long-term incentives for investors in the United States to invest in things like wind and solar and renewable energy, they need a long-term incentive, and they need clarity that those incentives are going to stay in place over time. You know, when you talk to businesses, one of the things that they often get frustrated about in Washington is that everything is temporary and that they need a longer investment horizon because they need a couple years to plan out the investment and raise the capital and execute on that. So setting a long-term goal and establishing that system that would provide the incentives is hugely important toward unleashing a homegrown renewable energy industry in the United States. The second thing is doing what the government does very well, which is invest in basic research that the private sector is often unwilling to do because for any individual business, there isn't the return on it. And so what the President committed to in the State of the Union tonight was a very substantial increase in clean energy research and development. I'll just take a second here to explain one very specific policy because I think it's quite cool, is he said that he wanted to double the number of energy innovation hubs that we have in this country. And this was an idea that Secretary Chu, who is a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, had when he came in, and he said the way that physicists in the academic environment often solve problems is that you bring a bunch of people together who have different views on an issue, and you all work collaboratively on a problem. These hubs are a manifestation of that idea. You get an engineer, a scientist, an innovator, an entrepreneur, a small business owner together, and you give them a goal, something that seems like a real moonshot to, you know, create fuel from the sun and from the water. Now, you know, right now you think, well, we don't have the technology to do that, but you put a bunch of people together and you say, solve that big problem. And what we've seen is, in the short time that we've funded some of these, for a very small investment, we're producing really path-breaking results. And so the President said, let's double the number of hubs that we have running in this country, because at the end of the day, the way that we're going to have a sustainable renewable industry in the United States is by finding real breakthrough technologies that will reduce the cost of producing electricity through these renewable sources to a level that's not only competitive with traditional sources of electricity, but actually can beat it without additional subsidy or support. So I think the investments in basic research are going to be really important going forward. And then the third thing that I would mention is something that, again, the President has been quite focused on, which is we need to invest in having a supply chain that supports the renewable energy industry in the United States. One of the problems that we have encountered is that if you only provide support for the production of a renewable unit of electricity, then you can get a situation where you have foreign firms who come in and who produce every component of that windmill or every aspect of that solar panel is not produced in the United States and gets brought into this country, gets assembled, and then they get a credit for that. They get a government subsidy for that, but it's not actually helping to create U.S. jobs, and it's not actually helping to support a broader industry in the United States. So one of the things that the President has really focused on is let's provide support for manufacturers who are making the blades that will go into a windmill. Let's help the people who are going to make the components that will become part of the solar panels in these installations, so that more of that activity is happening in the United States. More of the technology and intellectual property that is developed as part of that stays here in the United States, so that we have a sustainable renewable energy industry in the United States. So, you know, I think those three steps are important steps in the right direction, and I think what you heard from the President tonight was a real sustained commitment to make this a long-term part of our economic future.
Thanks, Brian. I know we're coming up on the hour. Do we want to take one more, Sarah, from online, and then one from the web forum, and then we'll close it out?
I'll let you do the last one. I
Okay,
think we're
sounds
close to
good.
time.
So this one came in on Twitter. Roberto, I think this is for you. Denjiman on Twitter wants to know, is the DREAM Act ever going to be passed? Whatever happened to the promise of immigration reform?
Well, You know, as the president mentioned this tonight, I think the DREAM Act is just it's been really a critical piece of legislation to really not only realize the dreams of individual students here who have been successful, who have by no fault of their own, may be undocumented, but have been working hard here, have been studying hard, and have been working toward really contributing fully to society and to graduating and continuing on to full civic engagement. It's a terribly important piece of legislation. It's why the president again really mentioned the importance of having a sound immigration policy that's comprehensive and that addresses some of the promises that were behind the DREAM Act. It's our hope to continue to advance that legislation and continue to press for that opportunity for really just thousands of young people who we know our nation needs to be competitive and really to win the future.
Thank you. Sarah, I'm sure you're going to chime in as we wrap this up. All the East Coasters here need to go to bed. We've been up for a very long time. But if you didn't get your question asked, get onto whitehouse.gov/SOTU because the president...
Everything you need to know.
Everything. President,
Everything.
Vice President, Cabinet Secretaries, a whole bunch of folks are going to be engaging with you throughout the week. The President on YouTube,
Absolutely.
Vice President on Yahoo,
Absolutely.
and then Cabinet Secretaries and other senior administration officials here, whitehouse.gov/SOTU, and to sign up for the youth call that I'll be moderating with David Plouffe and Stephanie Cutter, you can go to whitehouse.gov/youthcall. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, and hope to see you again soon. Thanks, guys.